I asked and you have spoken and decided. You want to work more on your hip mobility, at least that is what you struggle with the most. So who am I to deny you? 'Tis the season of helping people. So what we're gonna do today is go through many, and I mean many hip mobility exercises, and I will try to timestamp all of them below just so you can go through them and just mix and match, choose whichever ones you like and you're able to do and add them to your own hip mobility repertoire. If you're ready, let's start out really easy and work our way up in intensity so you can advance your hip strength, flexibility, coordination, and all in all, total health. Which brings us to our first exercise cluster, elevated seated exercises. We're gonna extend both legs in front of us. We're gonna get our hands on the ground, and the easiest thing to do from here is pull in your knee, strengthening your hip flexor and your quadriceps, as well as your lower abdominals while lengthening your glutes. So these are practically easy to replicate knee raises. Just pull that knee in and extend, pull in and extend. Very easy exercise, not much to add here. Advancing in intensity, we're gonna extend both legs, lengthen our toes, keep them fully extended, both legs, and raise them in this extended fashion. Once again, strengthening our hip flexors and quads and lower abdominals, this time a little bit more than before, and we wanna raise at the very least to hip height. All the way up, all the way down. Keep your quads fully flexed, keep your feet fully lengthened. We have some nice extension in our ankles, which is in turn gonna help us over time with our ankle mobility as well. Switching direction, still elevated seated position, we're gonna add external rotations in our hip joints, meaning we're gonna pull in like so, push outwards, up, and extend once more. We're working on our hip flexor strength, our quadricep strength, our lower abdominal strength, going into external rotation for our abductors and pulling in with our adductors before we extend once more. Now this exercise feels amazing going into this hip rotation, especially if you have a little bit more range of motion. You can help out the tiniest bit with your hands, push that knee all the way down and extend once more, which means that now we have added some rotational mobility to our extension and flexion in the hip. This moves us to by far one of my favorite seated hip exercises, and those are what I like to call the turnarounds. Basically, we're elevating our legs, turning around and doing the same thing with the other side, going into full rotation before we reverse the entire movement. Again, not only are we working on controlling our hip musculature, we have a little bit more abdominal inclusion as well. Not to mention that we're still staying in this low impact, high efficiency hip mobility level. The more upright you stay in your upper body and the closer you pull your legs, the more strength you will require, especially in your hip flexors and your quadriceps. Do the full turnaround, reverse, and do the full turnaround and reverse. Moving us to our last elevated seated hip exercise, both hands right here behind our head, and we're gonna do seated forward folds. Fold forward, keep your back in a neutral position, meaning we only go as low as we can before our back starts rounding. Once you notice you have some rounding in your lumbar spine, that means you've gone too far and you need to reverse a little bit further. Push your chest out, push your stomach out, go down with your spine in a neutral position and reverse the movement. You can go through slow forward folds and explosive reversals, or you can go through fast forward folds and slow reversals. Now we are strengthening our spinal erectors and we are strengthening and stretching our glutes, which in turn will help us release tension surrounding our hip joints. Not to mention that we're going into this nice rotation in both sides and moving forward, opening our hips and lengthening our adductors as well, stretching inside our thighs and up again. Full forward and reverse. Moving us to our next exercise cluster, still in a seated position, a little bit harder than the ones on the elevated seated position, but still very beginner friendly. Now you can already notice if you extend both legs if you do have the flexibility in your hips as well as the strength to sit fully upright, you're basically already more advanced than most people, because most people will have the problem that they are either falling back because of a lack of flexibility or because of a lack of strength, be it in their hip flexors, in their quads, or in their abdominals. So you can either lean back if you are missing the strength, and if you are not, you can try and stay fully upright using your own core strength. First exercise from here, we're gonna bring both feet together, pull them in, and extend once more. Turn outwards and reverse, repeat. We have symmetrical external hip rotation before we reverse the movement, and we are requiring a lot, and I mean a lot of core and hip flexor strength to stay fully upright. So you can either do it like this, or you can lean back to take the pressure off your abdominals and work a little bit more on the flexibility part of the movement. So now we have a lot of strength inclusion and flexibility, or we can focus on the flexibility part itself. Next up, same mentality. We want to stay fully upright in our upper body to have a little bit more engagement of these muscles. And now we're gonna elevate our extended leg, and we're basically going through outwards and inwards movements. The movements are very short, however, we want that leg completely flexed and extended all the way out, touch the ground, all the way in, touch the ground. A lot of core engagement, a lot of quad engagement. Our hip flexors are gonna be burning after just a handful of movements. And once again, if you do not have the strength or the flexibility to do it like this, then by all means, you can just lean back, go through the movement like so, and over time, lean forward more and lean forward more. Staying in the seated position, we're gonna add a little bit more strength of our posterior chain while lengthening our anterior chain, because we've usually been doing the opposite of this for the last couple of exercises, meaning we're basically sitting on both legs, and all we want to do from here is basically go into this hip thrust style movement, flexing our biceps and our glutes and our spinal erectors, releasing tension in our hip flexors, quads and abdominals, which we've been training this whole time. So this one's gonna feel really good after doing the other exercises we did before this, because we were shortening in our hips with every single one of those, and now we are lengthening in our hips. Very nice exercise, very easy, very beginner friendly, and you can increase the range of motion of this exercise if you want to by leaning backwards, which is going to increase the stretch in all of these anterior chain muscles. You can even do those reverse Nordic curls if you want to, but that is up to you. Moving to an exercise that lengthens our quads and hip flexors even more, we're pushing forward into a lunging position, and we're also pushing our knee forward as much as we can, adding a lot of ankle flexion. So now we've worked with ankle extension as well as ankle flexion, adding this as a bonus to our hip mobility routines while lengthening our hip flexors, abdominals and quads. Push forward all the way, strengthening our posterior chain by flexing all of these muscles and then releasing, reversing, just like so. You can add to this movement by folding forward to lengthen your posterior chain on the left side. So now we are lengthening our anterior chain on the right side while lengthening our posterior chain on the left side, as well as strengthening our anterior chain on the right side by flexing all of these muscles and then releasing and repeating once more. And this one feels absolutely amazing, especially if you want to add even more stretch to this. You can just bring that hand down and simulate like a couch stretch by pulling your foot in, and this feels, I swear, it feels so goddamn good on your hip flexors, just lengthening all of this, especially if you sit around for prolonged periods of time in the day. Then lengthening your hip flexor in any sort of way will feel good to you. Now, advancing our exercises even more, we'll go into complete rotations in our hip joint. So our starting position is like so, folding forward at our hip, extending backwards, and then we're gonna go into complete rotation with an extended leg until we are in front of our knee, and then we're gonna pull it in just like so, lengthening our glutes, the outside of our thighs, before we reverse the entire rotation once more and pull in. Now this exercise will require a lot of core control and a lot of stabilization in general, which makes this an absolutely amazing exercise to work on because of its multiple benefits throughout a single movement. Extend backwards, go through a complete rotation in your hip socket, pull in, stretch out those glutes before we reverse and pull in once more. If you're struggling with this movement, there's absolutely no problem in helping yourself out, and over time you can remove that hand and go through the movement all by yourself once more. Moving up the ladder in intensity as well as explosivity, because that's also something we're gonna need for our hip health, especially if we want to reduce our chances of injury. Staying in this seated position, we want to move explosively into a lunging position before we reverse the movement. And of course, we want to switch it up. Left side, right side. Step back, sit down, take a deep breath or two, and then move explosively back into this lunging position. This is an amazing exercise at priming your hip musculature or your anterior chain musculature to move that leg in an explosive fashion, which is very helpful if you need your reflexes, for instance, to catch yourself before you fall over. Explosive step forward and reverse. Controlled explosive step forward and reverse. Now this moves us to our next intensity level, which means that we're going to change our starting position into a deep squat or a resting squat. Now this will already be a challenge for some people, be it either because you are not flexible enough, for instance in your ankles, meaning your heels are raising, you're not strong enough in your core, or not flexible enough in your posterior chain, which means that you're starting to fall backwards. Don't worry about that, you can just elevate your heels for now, and over time you will get flexible enough to put those feet down, and you will get strong enough in your core to stay fully relaxed in this position. Starting with our first exercise now, the more upright you stay in your upper body, the more strength and control you're going to require. So if you can, bring those hands behind your head, and we're going to start with internal hip rotations. Bring your right knee in front of your left foot, touch down. We're rolling over our feet. Now we're going into this nice ankle flexion, which again is going to help you get into this deep squats over time. Once more, we're including our adductors, strengthening them. We're stretching basically every single muscle, tendon and ligament all the way up here, and then reversing using our tibialis strength to keep us fully upright. So now we're basically working on hip as well as knee and ankle mobility in one single movement, just through internal hip rotations. One of the most amazing exercises, and one that I add to pretty much every single deep squat routine or leg routine in general. Stay fully upright, internally rotate, and repeat on the other side. Next up, we're gonna do 90-90 switches, meaning we're gonna combine internal hip rotation, rolling over our toes into complete ankle extension with external hip rotations, getting into this 90-90 seated position before we reverse, using our hip strength and our leg strength to put that leg up, roll over our toes, and switch to the other side, rolling over, internal rotation, external rotation. And this one is gonna require a lot of engagement from your core and from your hip musculature to pull your body up and to reverse the entire movement in one fluid motion. If you're struggling with that, you can use your hands, help yourself out, put that leg down, take off as much pressure as you can with your arms and upper body, let that leg down all the way, get into full contact if you can, and then help yourself out once more to reverse the movement and sit down. This way you can work on the flexibility part a little bit more until you get the strength as well as the coordination to do the movement by yourself without helping yourself out or without compensating for a lack of strength or flexibility. Moving us to asymmetrical external rotations, slow and steady. Bring that knee down, push forward. We're now flexing our posterior chain once more. You can even extend the other leg all the way, lengthening our adductors a tiny bit, and then in a controlled movement, rolling over our toes, reversing and repeating on the other side. Now this is somewhat of a semi hip thrust or a pseudo hip thrust, moving only into one direction. And combining once more the lengthening our hip flexors and quads with the strengthening and shortening of our hip flexors and quads. Extend fully. We can engage our glute musculature a lot with this exercise, meaning that we're also strengthening our posterior chain enough to help us increase our hip health over time. Push forward, reverse, and push forward and reverse. That moves us from the asymmetrical to the symmetrical ones. We're gonna bring our knees down slowly in a controlled fashion. And that is very similar to the exercise we did before. Before we were doing our hip thrusts from a seated position, and this time we're doing it from a deep squat position, which is gonna include a lot more ankle flexibility as well as complete lower leg strength. We have a lot of engagement in our tibialis to keep this controlled movement up, and we have a lot of engagement in our posterior chain when pushing forward, stretching all of these, as well as a lot of engagement in our anterior chain to reverse this movement in a controlled fashion. Be sure to not slam your knees down, but go down slowly, controlled, just so you don't hurt yourself. Push forward and reverse. Now, just to release some tension in our hip flexors, we're gonna switch between extending both legs and moving forward, stretching our entire posterior chain and going into ankle flexion before we reverse and sit back down into our deep squat position. Open our arms, pushing our legs back, opening up our thighs and opening up our hips all the way before we place our hands on the ground again and going to complete extension once more. Now this one also feels absolutely amazing at switching between stretching the insides of our legs and stretching the back sides of our legs. If you want to, you can statically hold these exercises 20 to 30 seconds here, 20 to 30 seconds in the extension, or you can just move dynamically. Open up and extend, open up and extend. Now, of course, since I am a fan of holistic training methods, I would advise doing both. Combine static holds of this stretch and this stretch with dynamic movements of both of these. And now we're getting into the serious territory because we're going to add a lot of spinal mobility as well to these movements, starting with the 90-90 seated position. Now we're going to turn our upper body into this complete lumbar rotation, bringing both hands down on the ground and bringing our face down as well. This is going to lengthen our spinal erectors as well as our hip flexors and quads even more than before. But the important part here is that through this spinal rotation, we are stretching our back musculature, and that in turn is going to help us alleviate tightness in our hip musculature as well. Internal rotation, external rotation, full spinal rotation, face down, lengthening all of these muscles in the left side, starting at our foot, going through our tibialis, our quads, our hip flexors, our abdominals, and rotating our back, stretching our spinal musculature as well. Sit up, reverse, and repeat. Now, this exercise or this specific drill is in fact so effective and so good that I have an entire video breaking it down step by step and going through all the benefits you will be getting if you could add this to your own training routine. So be sure to check this out if you want to go through one of the most advanced and most effective mobility drills I have ever done in my life, and we'll move on to the next exercise cluster. So last but definitely not least, we're gonna use the Cossack squat as our foundation for the next exercise cluster, starting with very easy bendies in our knees. Now we're gonna keep our feet parallel because, and that's very important, parallel feet means stretch in our adductors, while turning our foot upwards is going to switch the stretch from our adductors to our posterior chain, meaning our biceps femoris and our calves. That's what they're called. So keep them both flat on the ground and parallel to work on your adductors, and in time, with a couple of other variations, we're going to switch it up and turn our foot up. So now we want to go lateral movements only, and we want to go as low as bringing our hip joint to knee level or even lower over time. You can keep your hands on the ground to help out. However, if you want to focus more on your strength while working on that mobility part, then I would advise keeping those arms extended here, and over time you can even pull them in to make this exercise even more advanced. Now, once we are far enough in our mobility to get down all the way with our feet parallel and to sit down completely, now we can move to the next variation. This one will have you raising your heel and turning your foot upward, and now we have a lot longer movement in this Cossack position. Sit down all the way, raise your heel, turn upwards, stretching the backside of your leg instead of the inside, and we're actively turning our leg into external hip rotation using only our glute and leg musculature. So we're not gonna push with our hands, we're just gonna use our own controlled strength to turn outward and to switch it up. This is going to require a lot of balance from you, which again is an amazing bonus to have with any sort of training. It doesn't matter if it's flexibility, mobility, or even your strength training. If you have balance aspects in your workouts, that is amazing. To advance this even more, requiring more strength and control, we're gonna lengthen this movement, going to this Cossack, and now we're gonna add this pseudo hip thrust, just like before. Carefully bring this knee down, push forward. This is gonna open up your hips even more, strengthening your posterior chain even more, and once again, controlled movement. Reverse, parallel, rotate, bring that knee down, push forward, reverse, and repeat on the other side. And this exercise also one of the most amazing exercises at lengthening basically our entire leg musculature while helping us add a lot of control and a lot of full body strength to these movements. Now, making this exercise even more advanced, and now with this one, please be very careful not to hurt yourself because it is a little bit more advanced. Once again, we're gonna start out the same way, but this time we're gonna keep our toes on the ground just like before, but instead of pushing forward, we wanna actually push back and down, bringing our butt into complete contact with the ground. We have external rotation in our hip, but we also have a lot of rotational forces on our knee and our ankle. Now, while those joints are not rotational joints, they will still benefit from having that stress put on them as long as there is no pain and as long as you're not actively injuring yourself. So be careful with this movement. Sit down all the way, and for the first couple of times, just use your hands to help you out. Bring that knee down and then take your time setting your whole body weight down before you help yourself out, and repeat on the other side. And once you get good enough with this movement, now you can just use your own control and your own strength. Sit down all the way and reverse and controlled. Sit down all the way and reverse. And this brings us to our last two exercises. Once again, using the Cossack squat as our foundation. Now we're gonna turn just like so. We're gonna bring our hand behind the extended leg, and now we're gonna push our hip up, lengthening our entire anterior chain all the way up to our fingertips while strengthening our entire posterior chain to push our upper body up with spinal rotation, hip flexor and quad lengthening, and a lot of strength and control before we reverse, switch it up, and move to the other side. Now, this is the easier variation of this exercise, and once again, this is one of the foundational movement patterns I add to my advanced mobility flows and routines. We have a lot of those, so check them out on this channel if you're interested. And now we're gonna move to the harder variation of this exercise. Starting in the same position, we're gonna sit down all the way, and instead of only touching down with our hand, we're gonna touch down with our entire lower arm. And then we're gonna push our hip up from here. This is not only gonna increase the stretch, but it's also gonna increase the required flexibility and the required strength for this movement. Now with this one, once again, I would very much like to advise you to add both static holds for like 10 to 20 seconds in the lengthened position, as well as dynamic movements with explosive fashion, just so you can get all the benefits from this one single exercise. Sit down sideways, push your hips up, reverse, and repeat on the other side. And there you have it, dozens upon dozens of hip mobility, hip flexibility, hip health, and hip strengthening exercises that will probably keep you busy for at the very least a year or two if you can use all of them. And if you add all of these to your hip mobility and leg strengthening as well as health routine, I can guarantee you will not only decrease your risk of injuring those spaces, but you're gonna get rid of a lot of tightness related pains, and overall increasing your quality of life, because hip mobility is very important when it comes to leading a good and healthy and mobile and limber life. But with that said, sadly, once again, that's all the time I've left for you today. However, if you liked the video and subscribe, and please check out other videos on this channel, because we literally have new ones every single day. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Captain Cairo, peace out.